Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. We expect a few people to trickle in throughout the presentation. I'm Anna Gremling, the Executive Director of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. I did want to take a second and highlight a couple of upcoming events. September 20th, we have our housing speaker, who is Allie Wolf from Zonda Housing and Research Company, to learn a lot about housing. And then October 30th, Jesse Singer, author of There Are No Accidents. For those of you who don't know, the Metropolitan Planning Organization was founded in transportation planning. Every time you fill up at the gas pump, you pay a federal gas tax. We get a portion of those back to the tune of about $60 million to invest in infrastructure projects around the region. While that is what we are known for, we've also stepped outside of just transportation and are doing more in land use, housing, resiliency planning, and other areas that cross jurisdictional boundaries. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our trail-oriented development project manager, Rose Scoville.
Thanks, Anna. The one area that Anna didn't mention that we've expanded into is economic development, and that is primarily my role with the MPO. I've led a number of projects, but one of the most exciting projects that I've been working on is the Trail-Oriented Development Plan. And this is, it's about the regional trail network. It's so much more because it's actually about development along the regional trail network. And we're not talking about stripping out development along the trails, but more developing nodes of activity in different places along those regional trails that cross jurisdictional boundaries. And so we're about 2/3 of the way through that plan. We just closed our second public survey and are working toward having a full range of conceptual nodes and development standard guidelines and other tools for developers, municipalities, and the general public to have a good understanding of what trail-oriented development is and how it could work in those jurisdictions. And so when we were looking for a speaker to connect to that work, we could not think of anyone better than Mr. Clyde Higgs of the Atlanta Beltline. And so we're thrilled to have Clyde with us today. He's an internationally recognized leader in the implementation of complex infrastructure strategies and has been named by Georgia Trend as one of the 100 most influential Georgians. He has a servant leadership style that he's known for and serves as president and CEO of the Atlanta Beltline Incorporated, which is the largest infrastructure development project arguably in the nation. The Beltline will provide a contiguous network of 7,500 acres of public parks, multi-use trails, and transit along a historic railroad corridor. Prior to joining the Beltline, Clyde served as the executive vice president of a disruptive billion-dollar revitalization effort led by real estate developer Castle and Cook in North Carolina. So this is the type of work that he does on a regular basis, working through governance and insights and community leadership and trying to bring all of these things together to make equitable infrastructure development and improve quality of life for residents. We are thrilled to have Clyde here. We're going to kick off with a video about the Beltline and then move straight into his presentation. Thank you for being here.
2022 has been a mosaic of progress as Atlanta Beltline Inc. continues to bring the Atlanta Beltline vision to life. Let's take a look at the big wins of the year. 1. New funding sources secured. The Beltline received substantial philanthropic and federal grant support for trail construction from the Woodruff Foundation, the James M. Cox Foundation, as well as a congressional appropriations bill and the Atlanta Regional Commission's Transportation Improvement Program. In addition, funding from the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration and the Candida Fund went towards small business support programs. ABI also began spending Special Service District, or SSD dollars to advance trail construction. 2. The full loop design plan identified. After ABI and the Path Foundation wrapped up a year-long feasibility study of the Northwest Trail, a preferred route has been identified for the final quadrant of the loop. And get this, within the next 2 years, 80% of mainline trail will be built or under construction. 3. Exceeding affordable housing goals. We celebrated several closings, groundbreakings, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies with partners, and wrapped up the year with the closing of 421 affordable housing units. This exceeds our annual affordable housing goal by 31%. We are now over halfway to our goal of 5,600 units by 2030. 4. Beltline Marketplace. 6 minority businesses were selected to participate in the pilot Beltline Marketplace program, which provides affordable commercial space directly on the Atlanta Beltline. The businesses set up shop in customized containers on the west side and east side trails, allowing them to tap into more than 2 million visitors. 5. Opening of West Side Trail Segment 3. The public can now enjoy 1.2 miles of new trail following the ribbon cutting of the West Side Trail Segment 3, which runs along Murrieta Boulevard. 6. Construction on Northeast Trail Segment 2. Construction began on the Northeast Trail Segment 2 Phase 2 behind Ansley Mall to install lighting, security cameras, landscaping, and build out the paved trail for a full 1.2 miles. 7. Selection of Murphy Crossing finalist. ABI officially selected real estate development company Cul-de-sac Inc. with Atlanta-based Urban Oasis Development as the finalist for the much-anticipated redevelopment of the 20-acre Murphy Crossing site. 8. Art provoked new conversations. The Atlanta Beltline welcomed the region's first Indigenous Stickball Summit, united some of Atlanta's most celebrated style writers, and brought many new murals, sculptures, and performances to the Beltline with the annual Art on the Atlanta Beltline exhibition. 9. Beltline Transit Progress. MARTA, in coordination with ABI and the City of Atlanta, reached 30% design plans for expanding the streetcar from downtown to Pond City Market. The Streetcar East Extension project is the first step towards bringing transit to the Beltline. 10. Lantern Parade on the West Side Trail. For the first time ever, the West Side Trail hosted the beloved Atlanta Beltline Lantern Parade, drawing a crowd of an estimated 10 to 15,000 people. As you can see, the gears have shifted. We're moving full steam ahead in constructing this massive transformational project. None of this would have been possible without our partners, stakeholders, and the community. Here's to a great year, and here's to the bright future we're building together for the generations to come.
Rose, thank you for that introduction. Rose, Anna, thank you for the invite. I really want this to be an informal conversation. Even though I'm here in a suit and tie, I'm a very informal guy. So don't let the suit fool you with regards to who I am. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about obviously the Atlanta Beltline project. And I'm probably going to demystify kind of who we are, what we do, and the success that we've had with regards to the Beltline. Because I think oftentimes people, when they hear the Beltline, the trail is the star of the show, but we do so many other things to really create economic impact. And so I'm going to make sure, so who has not heard of the Atlanta Beltline? I just want to make sure that we have some context there. Okay, perfect. We're on the same page. And so I want to stop and just give you some more context about the city of Atlanta, which is going through an amazing, I would describe it almost as a rebirth. Atlanta is home to Delta Airlines, it's home to UPS, it is home to just a number of corporate brands in the city of Atlanta. We're also known for Chick-fil-A, Home Depot, the world's busiest airport, and arguably we are home to hip hop as well. So as we think about celebrating the 50-year anniversary of hip hop, although I know it was started in New York, but Atlanta actually controls hip hop at this point. So any of your New York friends, tell them they can come talk to me if they see differently. We'll go to the next slide here. And I am a teacher by nature. So who knows the original name of the city of Atlanta? Come on, I know we got some good urban planners, some historians in here. Any guess? Anna, maybe? Gentleman here, I thought I saw your hand. Okay, all right. So Atlanta was, in its early days, essentially a railroad town. That's where the railroads converged. There was a number of 4 railroads, and the terminus was in the city of Atlanta. So the original name for the city of Atlanta was Terminus. And so we take great pride in that. And so you may see when you're in the city of Atlanta, people with a t-shirt that says Terminus that really speaks to a little bit of our history. But a lot of civic pride in the city of Atlanta. Again, with all of the brands, we really pride ourselves in being a very diverse city as well. And also, just to brag a little bit on the city of Atlanta, but Money Magazine rated Atlanta as the top city in the United States. And this was stated by Money Magazine. So a lot of good stuff going on for Atlanta. Got a strong university system, Morehouse, Spelman, Georgia Tech, Emory, Georgia State, just to name a few. So even though I talk about all these wonderful things about Atlanta, go to the next slide, but also what do you think about when it comes to Atlanta? This mess right here, right? Yeah, there you go. There you go. This is probably our Achilles tendon for the city of Atlanta. And we have to address this. And I'll share a stat from the Atlanta Regional Commission, our IMPO, that really studies regional issues for the city of Atlanta and the surrounding counties. But we are expected to add in the next 25, 26 years, almost 3 million people to the Atlanta metro. 3 million people in a metro that has roughly 5 million people or so. And so what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so this is really where the Beltline concept started, really helping communities have options to get around the city without getting into a private vehicle. Go to the next slide here, please. And so this whole concept around the Atlanta Beltline was born, and the lore behind it was a graduate student named Ryan Gravel, who had this concept of, like, could we make Atlanta into this walkable, livable city, much like we see in some of the more progressive European towns. And so we were blessed in Atlanta with these railroads, mostly abandoned railroad corridor. And so the concept was, can we repurpose this railroad corridor into this 22-mile loop that we all describe as the Atlanta Beltline? Go to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, about the trail being the star of the show. This was a very interesting article in the New York Times. It feels like a pejorative because they essentially called us a glorified sidewalk. But when you actually read the article, it was very kind in the way they described the Beltline project, because we are so much more than our trail network. If you'll go to the next slide, please. But we really consider ourselves to be a comprehensive redevelopment project in the city of Atlanta that ultimately creates benefits for our residents. That's really what we are. So not only do we do trail development, but we also exact affordable housing. We focus on private investment and job creation as well. And this is something that I share with our peer projects across the country, because I hear a lot of feedback like, hey, we want to do something like the Beltline. Like, we want to be like you all. But when you start to hear that conversation, sometimes they're talking about more of a wilderness walk. Or they're talking about a leisurely, trail stroll. And that's not what we're doing in Atlanta. This is really to get people around the city, giving them options to get around the city in a very comprehensive way. And with that, we have witnessed, so we've roughly invested about $720 million into the Beltline project to date, which sounds like a big number, and it is. But what we've seen on top of that investment is a $9 billion private investment impact along the Beltline. And that's not a multiplier effect. That is actually direct investment along the Beltline. And so, yes, we see people riding bikes, we see people walking, enjoying themselves, but that is really just the Trojan horse to get people indoctrinated into what city life could be without a car. Because if you look at the visitors that we have on the Beltline, we probably get 2.5 million visitors a year just walking on the Beltline. And not all that traffic is people that actually live in Beltline neighborhoods. These are people that are coming in from the suburbs and other places. Interesting piece though, about 10% of our traffic on the Beltline, those trips are originating from the airport. So people literally are flying into Hartsfield Jackson and they're finding their way to the Beltline. I thought that was an interesting stat. But ultimately what we're trying to do is create a place where people, I know this sounds cliche, but the whole live, work, play, thrive, get educated, get medical facilities, all on this corridor is what we're trying to do. Go to the next slide. And this is just a snapshot. I will ask you to revisit this when you get a chance, but these are the things that we're responsible for from a Beltline perspective. And so trail, future transit, affordable housing, job creation, private investment, environmental cleanup, public art, parks development. And so these are the things that are in the program of responsibilities for the Beltline, and we're supposed to achieve all of these things by the end of 2030 when our tax allocation district, maybe you call it a TIF here, sunsets. And so you can see one of our stated objectives is 5,600 units of affordable housing created along the Beltline by the end of 2030. And also you'll see here 25 or 30,000 jobs created along the Beltline corridor by the end of 2030 is another stated objective. $10 billion of private investment along the Beltline corridor is another stated objective. And again, we still have another 7 years to go, and we're already north of $9 billion in private investment, and that's exactly what we want to see along the Beltline. Go to the next slide. And these are just some pictures of the corridor. Sometimes it's challenging to imagine if you have not been to Atlanta. Who's been to Atlanta before? All right. Who's been to the Beltline, actually? All right, I see some energetic hands there. And so we'll go to the next slide. All right, the teacher in me is coming out again. And so one of the things that we are very focused on is obviously adaptive reuse and making sure that we show love and care to some of our beautiful mature buildings out there along the Beltline. And this building right here, you can't see it in its before state as well, but this is an historic facility. Anybody want to take a guess what it was, what it is? Who said that? All right, there you go. All right, you get a prize. So this was a Sears and Roebuck facility from the 1920s. It is probably one of the gems along the Beltline, and it's now called Pont City Market. And so if you ever go to Atlanta, And people will say, how do I get to the Beltline? They will typically say, go to Ponce City Market. It is literally right on the Atlanta Beltline. But it is one of the best examples of a reuse project that has turned into housing, retail, office space. You have a number of high-tech companies that are located there, but it is one of those staples along the Atlanta Beltline. And now you can see the after building. You can see it in the background there, but it is definitely a place to be. We'll go to the next slide. All right, that is another before picture. And this is an after picture, believe it or not. So this building right here on the right with the glass, that is a grocery store, literally right off the Beltline. So when we talk about having the Beltline as a place for people to get around and live your life, you can walk to a grocery store, you can walk to a medical facility, you can walk to your place of employment. All the things that add to a strong quality of life, you'll be able to do that on the Atlanta Beltline. As a matter of fact, in this building also, there is a company, a tech company called MailChimp. MailChimp roughly has about 3,000 employees. They're based right off the Beltline. I see some smiles, so you probably know that name. They were just acquired by Intuit Technologies. And they have, again, about 3,000 employees. But a third of their workforce uses the Beltline to get back and forth to work. That's the type of behavior that we want other companies to mimic. So roughly that's another 900 cars that are potentially not on the road because they're using the Beltline to get back and forth. And you can't see it in this photo, but there is a number of apartments just dotted around the Beltline where people live. You can go to the next slide. And this is another example of before the Beltline came around. And you go to the next slide. And this is what it looks like today. This is one of our signature parks right off the Atlanta Beltline. Again, another stated responsibility for us is parks development. You go to the next slide. This is another before. This was an unfortunate place that used to flood, and so we created this water retention pond. Doesn't look that way if you look at the next slide. This is what it looks like today. This is really where Atlanta comes together, and that's our tagline for the Beltline. So there are 45 distinct neighborhoods that really circle the Atlanta Beltline project. And so this is a normal weekend on the Atlanta Beltline. People love it. And it's a great cross-section of Atlanta too. So when you look visually, you will see that it's very diverse, old, young, middle-aged, black, white, everything in between. This is truly, truly where Atlanta comes together. Go to the next slide. And this is going over to another segment of the Beltline called the West Side Trail. So if you think about the Beltline as a loop, what we were just talking about was roughly 3 o'clock on the dial. And then the West Side Trail is roughly 9 o'clock on the dial. This is what it looked like before the Beltline came through. And this is kind of what it looks like on a regular day. And this is going through another historically black neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. Go to the next slide. So this is a big topic of conversation right now in Atlanta, and that is future transit. So the Beltline Trail has been so successful that now people are calling to question, like, do we really need rail transit along the Beltline? Let's just leave it as it is. And that's a real conversation, a topic of debate right now. But that was the original promise, was to have rail transit inside of the corridor. So this would be trail and transit all in the same corridor. And in 2016, the voters of the city of Atlanta passed a sales tax that will generate roughly $3 billion. And that money is specifically going to be used for rail transit within the Beltline corridor and other parts of the city of Atlanta. Next slide. And then we talk oftentimes about community impact. Like, how can the Beltline be a way to create benefits for the community? And that's the simple and plain truth. So again, I bragged a whole lot on the city of Atlanta being, the best city to live in the United States. All of our corporate headquarters, the Beltline, the Braves, the Hawks, the Falcons, the Atlanta United, our soccer team. Atlanta is a wonderful place to live, but we're also the #1 city with regards to income inequality. So if you're born poor in the city of Atlanta in a specific zip code, it is very challenging for you to rise up out of that. And why? In one of the most diverse cities in the world, why is it difficult for people that were born in Atlanta in certain zip codes, to rise out of that? So we are very focused and we're very intentional in our language and our policies to make sure that we are addressing those challenges. Go to the next slide. And public health. So we talk about trail. Oftentimes, one of the things we do not talk about with the Beltline is the public health benefits. And that was probably one of the great misses for Beltline when we first started in 2006, is to really do this longitudinal study to really follow community members that lived along the Beltline to see if their BMI had improved, did their health outcomes improve. Now, anecdotally, we believe that's probably the truth, but we can't prove that yet. But I will tell you, there has been some significant testimonials to people that have said, like, the Beltline, they will come up to me and, Clyde, the Beltline saved my life. I love the Beltline. But I have to remind people, especially now that COVID is starting to spike again. So think about the early days of COVID, and this is a snapshot of our social media account for the Atlanta Beltline. But literally, you can't see it probably from where you're at, but these red ovals are essentially, just chiding us on social media, like, oh my God, why is the Beltline open? My God, somebody might cough outside. Really? And I see people walking and they're trying to go to just like everyday life. And I know that sounds so perhaps silly in these days, but that was the conversation that we were having, and people had real fear. Now, we decided to keep the Beltline open because we had one of the world's leading public health officials, Carlos Del Rio from Emory University, and who consulted with us, and he told me, Clyde, absolutely. So the science just hasn't caught up to the populace yet, but people worried about spray or walking past each other, that absolutely is not going to be a challenge. And so we made the decision, to obviously keep the Beltline open. And it seems like such a ridiculous argument now, but in the early days of the pandemic, we heard some pretty loud cries for the Beltline to close. Go to the next slide. And this is kind of where we are today, really quick. What you'll see in the green is the trails that have been completed on the Beltline. So it's going to be a 22-mile loop within the city of Atlanta. We have completed roughly about 9.5 miles of trail to date. You can see here, roughly around 3 o'clock, the green area, that's what we describe as the East Side Trail. And you'll go over to 7 o'clock up to about 9 o'clock. That is what we describe as the West Side Trail. And we have raised roughly $400 million over the last 3 years or so. So we can say definitively that we will finish the entire Beltline project, with the exception of transit, by 2030. And we've had significant support federally. We just received a $25 million RAISE grant from USDOT. The Woodruff Foundation, which is old Coca-Cola money, gifted us $80 million to help support the Beltline. The Cox Foundation gifted us $30 million to support the Beltline. And then also our primary funding source, which is the Beltline Tax Allocation District, continues to grow in double digits on an annual basis. So my annual budget that we just passed for Beltline was $154 million. And so we have a team of about 65, 70 people that work in the Beltline Inc. organization. I report to a 9-member board of directors, the mayor, we have a representative from city council, a representative from our public school system, county government, and then the remaining folks are from the business and community leadership worlds. But this is just a snapshot here. We did 3 groundbreakings for new trail segments this calendar year. And so we are accelerated, we are moving forward. There is a world where we may even finish before 2030. Market forces have been very favorable to the Beltline with regards to land acquisition and just construction pricing as well. So we are blowing and going. Go to the next slide. And this is a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about the economic development impact of Beltline. And this is perhaps the untold story of our project, and that is jobs that have been created, corporations that have decided to locate literally on the Beltline. So probably our biggest announcement was Microsoft. And so Microsoft announced their largest corporate campus ever outside of their Washington facility. It will be in Atlanta, right off the West Side Trail of the Beltline. They essentially bought 90 acres. Now, if it ultimately comes to fruition, I'm sure they are rethinking now that everybody is working remotely. Does it make sense for them to have this large office footprint? But there were talks of 15,000 jobs from Microsoft located on this segment off the West Side Trail. And perhaps you don't know your Atlanta geography, but this was also in the Bankhead community of Atlanta. I didn't say Buckhead. I said Bankhead. Buckhead is perhaps our Beverly Hills-ish part of town. Bankhead is not Buckhead. I'll just say it that way. And so a significant economic impact. About 24,000 permanent jobs have been created along the Beltline corridor to date, with almost an additional 40,000 temporary construction jobs. And that's the type of impact that we're looking for. We want people to live, work, play, medical facilities, restaurants, office, the whole gamut that adds to a strong quality of life. We should be able to do that off of the Beltline. That is going to help address some of these challenges. If we're going to truly add another 3 million people to Atlanta Metro in the next 26 years or so, we have to figure out different ways for people to get around. Go to the next slide. These are just numbers about our job estimates. We think by 2030, there will be about 50,000 permanent jobs created along the Beltline corridor when we finish in 2030. Next slide. One of our strategies, we're all being honest, I know you've heard about the Beltline, all of its success, but one of the challenges in the early days was housing affordability. The Beltline became the high rent district in the city of Atlanta in many ways. So when I made reference to the Ponce City Market is getting the highest office and retail rents in the city of Atlanta, above Buckhead, which is our Beverly Hills section of town, but it's Ponce City Market, because that is where the workforce wants to be. It is easy for you as an employer to say, I'm going to set up shop on the Beltline, because then millennials and young people that you want to recruit, they want to be on the Beltline. So it is truly the place to be, but that's also created a number of housing pressures. And so the Beltline has a direct responsibility in exacting future housing affordability. And our mayor, Mayor Andre Dickens, is really the leader in this space. He was talking about housing affordability in 2013, 2014. It finally came to a head, and again, the mayor is on my on my board, but that's one of the things that we are specifically focused on, and also making sure that we acquire key sites along the Beltline for future housing affordability. Go to the next slide. One of the things that we have created, and along with our sister organization, is a legacy resident retention fund. So let's say you have a person who's been in a Beltline neighborhood for 40 years. Let's call her Grandma. Grandma's been in the community for 40 years. Then all of a sudden, here comes the Beltline, or here comes a new park, and all of this new investment. So when Grandma was paying perhaps $100 a year in property tax, now with all this new investment, that $100 in property tax now turns into $3,000 a year. And with Grandma being on a fixed income, what is she to do? So one of the things that we stood up is this fund. We literally will pay the difference from that base year to this extended year of tax development. So let's do the math. We will essentially cut Grandma or Fulton County a $2,900 check to make sure that she can thrive and stay in place when these new improvements come along. And so Georgia Power, Bank of America, Google, and a number of corporations have really stepped up to fund this program. So literally we can pay these longtime residents their property tax until we can come up with a policy fix. So we will have enough money to do this for about 10 years. And then after that, hopefully we will come up with this fix from the state of Georgia that will address some of those issues there. Next slide. These are just our numbers on the affordable housing production. Again, our goal is to hit 5,600 units of affordable housing created or preserved. We are on a track now where we will most likely exceed that number. There is a world that we think will beat that by over 1,000 units. Go to the next slide. And then also economic development. So we have a very robust team. Probably our second largest department within Beltline Inc. is economic development. And that's all they do is work with the small businesses along the Beltline to make sure that they can take advantage of this investment. So we probably have 5,000 little micro small businesses along the Beltline. And so yes, we talk about the big announcements, McKinsey, BlackRock, all these big name companies that are located on the Beltline. But at the end of the day, what really gives it its real charm are these mom and pop businesses around the Beltline corridor. And so that's all the economic development group will do, is making sure we're providing resources to small businesses. We can give grants for facade improvement. And so if there's been a legacy business that's been in a neighborhood for a long time, and now that the Beltline is coming through, we can actually provide a grant where we marry an artist with the business owner, and they beautify essentially that facade, and then that's an opportunity for that business to grow as the Beltline comes through. Go to the next slide. Economic development, you can see here at the bottom left, we essentially stood up the Beltline's first small business incubator. And so with rent rates being at $65 a square foot at Ponce City Market, there's not a lot of businesses that can afford that. So what we have done is we stood up these containers. We placed them literally right on the Beltline, and we allow these small businesses to operate there. We actually outfit them with a commercial kitchen, and we've selected a number of companies to be in this first cohort in the Beltline Small Business Incubator Program. We charge them $260 a month to be there, so it's very attractive. And then we also have a partner, the Village Market, that actually provides these wraparound services from accounting, legal, bookkeeping, you name it. They provide those type of coaching services to the businesses. Go to the next slide. And then also on the public art side, we host perhaps the largest public art exhibition in the United States, in the southeastern United States. And it culminates with something called the Atlanta Beltline Lantern Parade. Before the pandemic, we would get about 70,000 people that would come out with handmade lanterns in the evening and just walk on the Beltline. It is a sight to behold. And so hopefully that gives you a snapshot of some of the things that we are involved with regards to the Beltline project. But if you don't remember any of the gobbledygook that I talked about in this conversation, it truly is an economic development engine for the city of Atlanta. We just happen to use trail infrastructure as a way to get there. The outcome, the goal is economic development. We use concrete infrastructure to really produce those outcomes for the community at the end of the day. And so thank you very much. That is my formal remarks. And I believe we are going to sit down and have a conversation, Rose and I hope that you all ask questions. I'm an open book with regards to this project. I am never surprised by anything new that we do on the Beltline. Today I was on a number of calls about new companies that want to locate along the Beltline. And so again, from an economic development perspective, I would say outside of the airport, the Atlanta Beltline is perhaps the most important economic development tool for the city of Atlanta right now. It is generating significant impact. And so when it's all said and done in 2030, we are estimating that the direct private investment on the Beltline is going to be north of $20 billion off of this glorified sidewalk.
So we're going to start with a few questions that I have and have a conversation around those, and then we will invite additional questions as we go. But one of the questions is, Indianapolis, like a lot of Midwestern cities and cities around the country, is really car-centric. People like to drive, they complain about it being too hot, too cold, too icy, too whatever. And sometimes it is those things. But how are you making the Beltline work in a car-centric city, and how did you get the trail component to experience great success?
No, that's fair, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but we don't have a choice. This is not a luxury for the city of Atlanta anymore. So again, if you believe the numbers from our IMPO, we don't have a choice. We have to develop projects like the Beltline in the city of Atlanta. And so we're truly going to add nearly 3 million people to the metro. Projects like the Beltline are going to be key for people to get around the city. And our goal is to give people options to walk to a grocery store, walk to your child's school. So there's roughly about 20 schools around the Atlanta Beltline as well. So you got to think about for our kids, having a safe route to school is a significant piece for community development. So again, grocery stores, restaurants, medical facilities, educational facilities, jobs, all in a certain geographic area where you don't have to get in a car. And then we start talking about affordability. If you can take a vehicle expense out of someone's household, that's significant. And so that's what we're trying to do for Beltline. I will say from a success perspective, if we're all being honest in Atlanta, we thought the Beltline was going to be successful. We did not guess that we were going to have it. There are some months that we see 350,000 people that walk on the Beltline, just a certain segment. And that's probably conservative. And of course, when people say it's conservative, they like to boost the numbers, right? But I'll tell you, we have laser counters on the Beltline. So if Rose and I...
I was just going to ask if you were counting.
Yeah, so if we're walking past together, that's counting as one. And so if we're counting 300,000+ people on the Beltline, you can imagine the number is much more significant. But But all the things that titillate and amaze people, like, oh, that great restaurant or that brewery, that is really, again, just the Trojan horse to give people, to really charge up their imagination about what city life can be. Because we've heard a number of stories where people are like, oh, you know, I live on the outskirts of Atlanta. When I come visit the Beltline, like, oh, wow, I could see my life without a vehicle. And so it really is there to charge up people's imagination, and it's just done it in droves.
Fantastic. Is there a bike share component?
There is. So I'll go back to DuPont City Market, and not everything is, this is the wonderful piece about the Beltline, that we have to manage on our own. But as a program, that DuPont City Market and their owner, Jamestown, they actually manage that bike share program along the Beltline. It is wildly popular. I would say for those that have actually visited the Beltline, you know, probably one of the complaints is that it's too crowded. Like it is on a Saturday at lunchtime. Those are some of the complaints that we get. Is like, oh my God, can you create more space along the Beltline and separate pedestrians from cyclists and scooters and things of that nature. So those are some of the debates that we're having.
Oh,
right
you
now.
just opened the door.
I did. I know I did. I know I did.
So how have you and the city thought about scooters on the trail, and how are you regulating that or not? What choices have you made?
Yeah, that was one of my first challenges when I became CEO for the Beltline. I had the scooter lobby to reach out to me to say that scooters should be allowed, because there was a big outcry in the city of Atlanta about not allowing scooters on the Atlanta Beltline. Now for us, we decided, because the Beltline is a transportation corridor, we have to allow various forms of transportation along the corridor. We do not allow motorized vehicles or gas combustion engines along the Beltline, but electric vehicles like scooters are technically allowed. Now what we decided to do is geofence those scooters where you can't go 16, 17 miles an hour. When you hit the Beltline corridor, I think the fastest you can go is maybe 8 or 9 miles an hour. But that's probably our number one complaint in our box is scooters. And then you have scooter people, pointing at cyclists, and cyclists pointing at, people who are walking their dogs. So it's a lot of this out there. It's just a lot of people out there.
I'm glad it's not just us. This is a challenge, even in really, model places like that, because that's a lot of the conversation that we're having regionally in some of the places that are more successful along the trails, certainly in Broad Ripple Village, the Midtown Corridor, the Carmel Art and Design District. Those are areas that get congested in some of the conversations that we have. And then the Cultural Trail downtown. A lot of that same conversation is happening here. So shifting gears a little bit, what are some of the challenges you face in getting projects off the ground?
Yeah, so I would say from a challenge perspective, just remembering the early days of Beltline. When we first started, we were met with lawsuits, the Great Recession in 2008, just a number of challenges that we had in the early days. And again, we're primarily funded by a TIF, and if the economy is not doing well, then we just don't have a lot of funds to actually push the project forward. And one of our great misses in the recession was that we didn't buy a whole lot of land that was just sitting there ripe for future affordability, not only just on the residential side, but also on the commercial affordability side as well. Now we are catching up, and we're in a good place with regards to the housing affordability in partnership with the other entities in Atlanta that think about it. But those were some of the big challenges for us. And I will tell you, we did a survey, Rose, that we asked the question to community. About 7,000 people responded. We asked a dangerous question. Is the Beltline still worthy of public investment? And 80-something% of respondents said, yes, it is. We love the Beltline, but why does it take so long to build the Beltline out? It's just like, when is it ever going to get to my community? This is before we raised the $400 million, but there was really that pent-up demand about, is the Beltline really going to come to my neighborhood? And then also, questions about housing affordability was out there. And but we are on a pathway to rolling forward. But we don't do anything without having a conversation with the community. We don't chew gum without having a conversation with our community. Another large department in the Beltline is our planning and community engagement group. I mean, everything that we do, we stop and have a very intentional conversation with the community about what they want to see. Because the Beltline is going to be very different in other neighborhoods. So you saw a lot about the East Side Trail, but on the West Side Trail, they may want to curate something very different. And so we're very intentional about these community conversations.
So going back to the Great Recession a little bit, in 2008, people were still trying to figure out what it meant. But in 9, 10, and 11, as you were starting to have those conversations, those difficult conversations, and you didn't have as much coming in from the tax allocation district, yeah, the crystal ball of like, land prices were cheap, we should have bought them, but also you weren't seeing the revenue that you wanted. Did you have concerns or conversations that went like, hey man, this was like maybe cool, but now like the world's changing, and do we still make this investment? Not just with the public, but with the major investors that you need, with city leadership, with the state?
That's a great point, because the city officials could have easily said, this is hard, but one of the benefits of the Atlanta Beltline is that we're a project that was born from the community. And so it would be very difficult for anyone to wave a magic wand and say, oh, the Beltline's not happening, because this is what the community asked for. It wasn't anyone from an elected official perspective. Community came together and said, we want the Beltline to happen. And so politically, it would be very challenging for that to happen. But that's the blessing and the curse of it, because we don't do anything without the communities, which makes things take a little bit longer. But we also have that insulation from with the community, that they want to see the Beltline push forward. And I have to give a shout out to Shirley Franklin, Mayor Shirley Franklin at the time, who pushed this project forward, and City Council President Kathy Woolard at the time, Ray Weeks. There were so many people in the early days that just kept pushing this, even when times were hard. And then we also have the federal government there that was really an advocate for Beltline and what we were trying to do. So when we emerged from the ashes, if you will, we were ready.
Great. So you talked a little bit about not doing anything without the community and having a large community engagement department. But the Beltline goes through 45 neighborhoods. It's a large geographic area that it both touches and encircles. How large is your community participation staff? And then how do you engage with them? Can you go to 45 neighborhood meetings every month and events every weekend and all of those sort of things that are more difficult to do on a large scale?
It is. So our team, headed up by Lynette Reed, has roughly about 8 people in community engagement. And we are mandated to go to the community 4 times a year. But in practice, we go to the community about 90 times a year. I mean, we really engage community. Now, we don't do that in every community every month. It's about focusing on where the projects are at right now. But there's always an opportunity for people to have a citywide conversation about the Beltline. Then we have some very focused meetings with regards to community. Like right now, we are about to set up another robust community conversation in the Pittsburgh community of Atlanta. So we just acquired almost 14 acres of land right off the South Side Trail, the Beltline. It was a big deal in Atlanta, and so now we have to start thinking about programming that. And so we will set up a community advisory group. They will give us some really good input on what they want to see on that site, and then we will commercialize that and put it into the market and go from there. But we are very proud of those conversations. Now they are difficult sometimes. I mean, very difficult. But we get very high marks about not being afraid to have the challenging conversations out there with community.
So how do conversations with developers go? Are they jazzed about wanting to do the right thing, or are you constantly having conversations about how this kind of development is maybe different than you would do in other parts of Atlanta?
Yeah, just great questions. Our development community has really responded well to what we're trying to do with regards to the Beltline, with regards to housing affordability, parking minimums, density, like all the things that we care about from an urban perspective. Most of the development community has really stepped up in a significant way, and even doing things that they don't necessarily have to do, like on the commercial affordability side. We have certain developers that are carving out significant chunks of their facility for future commercial affordability. And so they're going to provide below market rent to legacy, old, established businesses along the Beltline in these new developments. There are certain developers that have stepped up on the affordable housing side significantly, but that's just what we do in Atlanta. It's hard to operate in Atlanta if you are not part of that conversation and opting in. It's just going to be very hard to do business, and that starts with our elected officials, our mayor, our city council. You have to be in that posture if you want to do business in Atlanta.
That's fantastic. Good to hear. For certain groups of people, if you build it, they will come with trails and development along trails because they're interested in that lifestyle, or they face challenges that make it difficult for them to drive even if they can afford to, or they like to recreate on trails, run, ride bikes. For the people who don't see themselves there, how do you program out the trails or the development notes to make people want to come and check it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So not everyone is built like me. I'm a person that I love to ride my bike. I love to get outdoors, and that's just who I am. But not everyone is built that way. That's why when we talk about the Beltline, it's about like, what is good for your quality of life. If you're a person that literally just likes to, like, I want to get to the grocery store, and if that's how you enjoy the Beltline, knock yourself out. And anything from a community event that gets people out to really give them a glimpse to what a car-free or less of a car life could be like, by getting them to a restaurant, getting them to a concert, and we do a number of those things that really speaks to community. So we have artists that might be on the country and western side, to artists that are on the hip hop side, to DJs, and you name it. We are speaking to whatever that community is looking for. I dare to say I think that probably 80% of residents in Atlanta have been on the Beltline more than 5 times. I mean, even if they don't live in one of the key neighborhoods, because there is something that adds to their quality of life on the Beltline, and it draws them to it. But then when people ask the question like, hey, I'm a school teacher, I make $38,000 a year, how do I afford the $2,500 rent for a 1-bedroom apartment? That's hard for that teacher to do. And so that's why an affordable housing piece is so critical, because you want the teacher that actually teaches your child to be able to live in that neighborhood that they work in. And the same thing with police officers or firefighters. The people that serve your community, you don't want them to have to drive an hour and a half out from Gwinnett County or other places outside of Atlanta We want them to be able to live in those communities where they serve. And that's why that affordable housing push is so critical, to make sure that the Beltline is for all.
Fantastic. As a triathlete, I check into things and races, and I've been to Atlanta to race the Peachtree Classic. I actually raced the 50th anniversary edition. But I hear that some of the activation that you do along the network is running club groups and some races. But you're also home to the Atlanta Track Club, which is one of the largest and most well-organized running clubs in the country. Do you collaborate with them, or do you try to compete with them? How does that work in your community?
You're right. So the Atlanta Track Club is a very sophisticated, older organization, and we absolutely collaborate with them. Rich McKenna, who's their CEO there, we have a very good relationship, and we host 5Ks along the Beltline on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, at some point we hope that the Atlanta Track Club will actually have a physical presence on the Beltline. And one of the things that we're planning for 2030, when the whole Beltline is finished, is to have a marathon. And so we're going to work with the Atlanta Track Club to program that for us, but they do an amazing job. The Peachtree Road Race, it's not necessarily on the Beltline, but it's just something that all of Atlanta comes together, and it starts right in front of my house in Buckhead too. So I love the work that they do, and that's the thing about the Beltline. So yes, Beltline, we are the quarterback for a lot of the things that happen on the Beltline, but yes, we don't do everything. We try to empower other not-for-profit organizations and to lift them up to whatever it is that they do and allow them to work on the Beltline, like Trees Atlanta, the Atlanta Track Club, just a number of organizations that do really, really good work. And then we make sure we provide some space for them to exact their outcomes as well.
That's great, because a lot of times everybody's trying to take over or compete with others, and really it makes more sense when we stay in our lane and make connections more than anything else. So the last kind of question that I have is, how do you work with permitting and zoning and all of that to make sure that the kind of development you want to have happen can get through planning boards and boards of zoning appeals and all of that? And while you're a separate entity, talk a little bit about some of the unique powers that you have that aren't normal for a nonprofit.
Yeah, that is, again, just great questions. So again, Atlanta Beltline, Inc., we were created, think of us as a spin-off company out of the city of Atlanta. And although we do not work specifically, I'm not a city employee, but we are a very close cousin to the city. So we have many of the powers and authority or the relationships to really work with the city from a permitting perspective, condemnation, if we need to go that route. So we have some authority there. We actually have our own design review committee for the Beltline. So if you're a developer and you're going to develop a new office building or a new residential building or a new mixed-use facility, you have to come through the Beltline's design review committee first before it actually gets formal permitting from the city of Atlanta. And so it's been robust. That's a very active group. Last year, there were 12,000 new permits that came through the city of Atlanta, just to talk about from a growth perspective. That's from April of 2022 to April of 2023. That's the type of throughput that we're seeing. And I have a very close relationship with the planning commissioner for the city of Atlanta. I actually go to the mayor's cabinet meetings with all the other commissioners, and so it is a very cozy relationship. Again, I'm not a city employee, but we are very, very close cousins.
Fantastic. I am going to come on down and bring the mic out and welcome people to come up and ask questions that you have. I got this one.
Yep.
I'm good. I just need to not trip, because that'd be classy. Questions?
I have wondered on the development of the trail itself, how it was decided on which areas were developed first and how it's decided on which ones are gonna go next. If somebody comes, are the neighborhoods then incentivized to raise funds? And if somebody came with some money and said, hey, we're gonna put a nice development over here and we're willing to give you this, would it change where you went with the development?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So we have what we describe as the Beltline Bible. It's our redevelopment plan. And we have some guiding principles on equity and which quadrants we're going to work on. Now, obviously, we went to the East Side Trail first, which is, again, about 3 o'clock on the dial. But then we had to immediately go to the West Side, which is historically Black community, because there were rumblings like, the Beltline will never come here, but we delivered on that. And being that our primary funding source is from our tax allocation district, we are not beholden to any outside fundraising per se. We have a very specific development plan based on these equity principles, and that's how we're developing. Now, we're also opportunistic as well, so we see an opportunity there, and that now that we have funding and we are staffed up, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So it doesn't have to be just one segment. We did 3 groundbreakings this year. We'll have another groundbreaking the first quarter of 2024. So you will not hear a whole lot of that in our communities. It's like, oh, when is the Beltline coming? We're coming in short order. But our philanthropic community has stepped up big. Again, I mentioned Woodruff Foundation, an $80 million check, to Beltline. The Cots Foundation, $30 million, which is their largest gift ever. Individuals have stepped up and provided funding, programming. And so we enjoy just a lot of community and neighborhood support for the project, and we try to be very responsive to that. But to get to your question, we have a prescribed way that we're building out the trails.
I've been involved with some rail trail all around the state. The photos you were showing, that corridor looks really wide. What kind of width did you have to play with, and what kind of width is the actual trail? Because people are saying it's too narrow now.
Yeah. So in places we have about 220 feet that we have to work with, but then there are places that we are closer to 90 to 100 feet, which is still good, right? But to people that use the Beltline right now, they're actually calling into question, how are you going to fit a train or a vehicle, a light rail vehicle in the corridor? Now the physics still work, the math still works, we can do it, but people really question, like, let's just make the Beltline wider, which is 14 feet wide, the actual Beltline trail itself. Maybe look at our soft shoulders and some other things, it probably expands to about 18 feet. And many people say that's still too thin from their perspective.
Thank you. Evan?
Hi there. So imagine 2030, 2040. You've got your whole system up. It's all around the city. Still have growth to do. You're trying to look at to the outside area. Do you have a process in place your conversation started to make those connections to the outside areas, to bring those connections back into the city?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we would not be fully realizing our responsibility if we just did the 22-mile loop within the city of Atlanta. And so I made reference a little bit earlier about a $25 million grant from U.S. Department of Transportation through their RAISE program, and that's specifically for regional connectivity outside of Atlanta. So there's other cities, Brookhaven, DeKalb County will be able to dive right into the Beltline loop. You know, that whole hub and spoke model there. Beltline is the hub, and we'll have multiple connections. So when it's all said and done, you'll be able to literally ride a bike on the Beltline, get to the Silver Comet Trail, and ride a bike all the way to Alabama when it's all said and done. And so that regional connectivity is absolutely important to us. And now we're actually looking at one from the south as well. So you'll be able to potentially get from the airport all the way to the Beltline. The airport is not technically in the city of Atlanta. Most people, when you fly in, you don't know that. It's in a smaller community outside, but you'll be able to do that if we're successful from this regional connectivity perspective. But we just don't have a choice, right?
With 3 million additional people on top of the current population, while Atlanta is substantially more dense than many communities, certainly than any community in central Indiana, do you still have pushback about the density and intensity of use in certain areas along the trail?
Yeah, we do. So we are not immune to those challenging conversations, especially in very affluent communities. And there is one segment of Beltline in the northwestern segment where we had a very challenging community conversation, because 95% of the city of Atlanta is like, bring the Beltline to my community. I want it right here in my backyard. But sometimes if you go through neighborhoods where you have, $4 million houses, they're like, I'm not sure I want the Beltline coming right in my backyard. And so those are some of the conversations that we had to have on the Northwest Trail segment. And then it's also challenging when we try to talk about density. But again, we don't have a choice. But again, we're blessed in Atlanta where most people realize we have to do this. And but you still get the, like, oh yeah, we have to do it, but can you just do it in that neighborhood? I mean, we're not immune to that.
Sounds fair.
It's interesting. One of the most distinctive things about the Beltline is that, unlike most urban assets, it doesn't go downtown. So I was curious, number one, just with COVID and kind of office space, foot traffic in downtowns, is there any tension that it's just in basically historic neighborhoods and goes around downtown? And similar question with transit being a circle instead of a line through the downtown. Just what are your thoughts on running a circular network?
Yeah, that you all clearly have studied the Beltline. So that's a great question. And so we just delivered a new segment of Beltline that actually dives into downtown. So it's very new, but it's called the West Side Connector. It will fly right past, if you've ever visited Atlanta, the Georgia Well Congress Center. And so it really will peel right off of that and dive directly into downtown. And just for that very point, we don't want it just to be this circular system. You ultimately want to have crosstown routes there. And it's interesting, even that segment of Beltline, Georgia Tech is very close to that area. And Georgia Tech is developing something called Science Square, much like I think you have something called 16 Tech, yeah, here, and it's going to be right off the Beltline. So just imagine, we talk about a lot of tech companies around the Beltline. Now we're going to have this biotech component very close to the Beltline, or life science component to the Beltline. And so that is moving forward. And with the streetcar system, yes, it will be the circular system, but there are also 2 crosstown routes with that as well. So that's being contemplated if we can get it rolling. Because again, this conversation about leaving the Beltline as is a heavy one right now. So you see these bloodshot eyes, it's because I'm probably got a text message from a developer right now. Clyde, why are you doing streetcar? Because the current streetcar in Atlanta, unfortunately, does not have a good reputation, because most people don't think about it as a demonstration project, and because it doesn't go anywhere per per se, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was for it just to be an experiment in the city of Atlanta that will ultimately connect to job centers and so forth. And but most people look at our current streetcar as a failure.
How about that, Rose?
Yes, I can bring you a microphone all day long, every day. You have to talk to someone.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm curious, our organization here in Indiana, I'm executive director of a statewide organization called Prosperity Indiana. And what we do is community and economic development throughout the state. We're having a lot of conversations on the language of affordable housing. How are you all currently defining affordable?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And are you having to use the fun attainable housing instead of affordable?
No, we say affordable housing, and again, I realize being in Atlanta, we're just blessed with being able to be very direct and upfront about what that means. And but for us in our programmatic areas for Beltline, our mandate is 80% of area median income in the city of Atlanta. Now, operationally, what we do is 60 and below, because that's really where the need is, 60% of area median income and below, because that's when you start getting closer, to the needs of teachers and things of that nature. And so, if you look at our pipeline, it's mostly 60% of area median income and below. And that's why I talked about the land acquisition strategy earlier, because when you control the land, and I know you know this, when you control the land, you can do deeper and long-term affordability. But if you're just giving a developer an incentive, which is also one of our tools, it's hard for the numbers to work, right? And so, but when you control the land, we literally can donate the land inside of the capital stack. And so now that we're challenging a development partner to say, hey, we need 50% of area median income for 30 years or permanent. And you can do that when you donate the land inside of the deal. And that's why that land acquisition strategy is so critical.
You mentioned that the tax allocation district does have a sunset, which is very standard practice. You're coming closer to that sunset date. What does Atlanta Beltline Inc. and the programming and continued development and responsibility for the system look like past your tax allocation district?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and one that we're thinking about right now. So we're in the midst of refreshing our business plan called the Strategic Implementation Plan. And we're asking those questions right now. What happens post 2030? I think there are some voices that will say, why are we shutting it down? There's so many other needs out there. But that is a political conversation that we'll probably have to revisit in the next 3 or 4 years. But right now, our TAD generates almost $80 million a year. And in 2030, we think that's going to be about $120 million a year. And so for our TAD partners, like the school system, they may say, hey, you know what? We want our chunk of that $120 million to go back to the school system, which is the original deal in the first place, is that we're going to create value around this abandoned railroad corridor where nothing was happening. And then when it's all said and done, then you'll get this bolus of revenue back to the school system or back to county government or back to city government. But I think the politics, if I had to read the tea leaves, is that there will be some additional needs beyond 2030, like maintenance, for instance.
Right.
We're a capital tech. We can only use our dollars for capital expenses and not for maintenance.
Fair. Is there maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap it up from there, but I will try to get, once we have the video recording and we have some other assets to share, we'll be sending those out to everyone who's registered as well.
I guess I just wanted to check. So the predominance of the beltway is on a previously trail or railroad. Were they easements? Was that dedicated land? Was the acquisition cost negligible, or did you actually have to go pay to acquire the land where the trail is?
That's a great question. We have more gray hair is from negotiating with our railroad company. I love, just in case this is on video, in case they hear me, I love the railroad. I love CSX and Norfolk Southern. But no, we had, this was actually simple. We had to acquire the land. And so just to give you our last major transaction was for the South Side Trail, and this was about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, 4 acres, and we paid $26 million
So you're
for
able to
that
actually
4
go out
acres.
and acquire the land. So then is there like an overlay district that takes in the land that you acquired plus the adjoining properties when you're talking about?
There is, and so we call that the Beltline Planning District. And so it's half a mile on each side of the Beltline Trail itself. And that is kind of our planning area, our overlay district that we have some authority for.
Is that approved community by community as you move along through it?
It is, and so we have something also, another plan, sub-area master plan that we've developed, and it is community specific there.
And then you kind of answered the question, but what is the plan? I mean, how do you handle snow removal? I mean, what is the long-term, you're supposed to laugh at the snow removal piece, but how do you handle the long, no, get into it, right? What is the plan for long-term maintenance on these kind of facilities?
Yeah, our whole 2 inches of snow that we have to remove, yeah.
Every other year.
Yeah, every other year. But that's a fair question. So the deal structure is that Atlanta Beltline, we plan, design, and construct, and then there's a year's warranty period, and then it goes over to the city of Atlanta to do the maintenance. But our city and Department of Parks and Rec is not unlike a lot where they have capacity challenges, not enough staff, not enough budget, and that is a major concern for us right now about what we're going to do, especially now that we are accelerating. Because 4 years ago, the Beltline may get finished in the next 20 years or so. But no, we're about to be finishing by 2030. And so the city's responsibility on that is significant. And so they got to think about not only maintaining the 9 miles, but they're going to have to think about maintaining the 22 miles. And then it also has implications to our police department. So we have women and men, sworn officers, that ride their bikes along the Beltline, patrol it, keep it safe and secure, and we have about 10 officers that do that. So think about when we have 22 miles of Beltline, so that has implications from a staffing perspective from the Atlanta Police Department to staff up quickly to make sure that we have coverage around the entire 22-mile loop. Now, we don't need the same concentration in certain places of the Beltline that we need, like on the East Side Trail or certain segments of the West Side Trail, but it has significant implications. So when you start thinking about the TAD, sunsetting, I think that will be an area that we'll look at is long-term maintenance, of this asset.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and please join me in thanking Clyde for joining us today.